Yeah, everybody turn your mics on.
Check, 1, 2.
It's a Harbor Committee meeting, July 10th, 2019, 7:30 a.m. Start off with procedures. I'm going to read this. In order to facilitate the public understanding and to maintain a complete and orderly meeting, the format and procedure will be as follows. The meetings will be electronically recorded and minutes are being taken. Minutes shall consist of a condensed summary of the facts of the meeting. Meetings are broadcast in their entirety on cable channel 1303 or YouTube under Town of Camden. To maintain order, all comments and questions must be directed through the chair. Public comments are encouraged and important to this process. To maintain clarity, please exclude irrelevant or unduly repetitious comments. Each speaker must state his or her name, residence, and connection with the interest in the topic prior to speaking. Please speak into the microphone. Speakers and committee members are requested to come to the meetings prepared to discuss matters in a clear and concise manner. If necessary, a time limit will be imposed. It is this committee's intention to conduct meetings in a fair and unbiased manner. Because this is the first meeting, there's also a procedure for public hearings. So we will have a public hearing on the bench, so let me read those. Topics will be introduced by the chair. The committee will hear from the applicant and will then seek comments from all persons wishing to speak. After presentation from the applicant and comment from the public, the committee will then close the public discussion and comment portion of the hearing. The committee will then deliberate before a decision is made by a majority vote. There will be no further comment from the applicant or the public during the deliberation phase unless a majority of the committee votes to reopen discussion. Discussion should be reopened only to obtain clarifying or erroneous omitted information, or give the committee an opportunity to ask additional questions. It is not appropriate for the public to interject during the deliberation portion of the hearing. So, now to move on to the agenda. First item is non-agenda items. Do we have anybody with non-agenda items?
I got one. We have one.
Would you like the microphone?
Yes.
You can have 2.
This is odd.
Dominic.
Okay, so before, this is, we're 4 of the day sailors that run out of Camden, and you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Aaron Lincoln, I own the schooner Olad and the cutter Owl.
Jeff Beck, I own and operate the sloop Heritage.
Ramiro Acevedo Ramos, I own and operate Schooner Surprise.
And Dominic Joya, my wife and I own the Lively Lady. Before the former Harbor Committee got dissolved, we have been spending a lot of time working on some just different things with with our license agreement and the ordinance with the windjammers. We met several times. All that kind of got dissolved, and we just want to make sure that we can continue working on it. So we were wondering if we could possibly get that put on the agenda to continue working on all that stuff that we were working on last year and the year before. And also, we also would like to say that we would also like to work with the town when it comes to the redesign of the boardwalk and just help put in some input with that too. Just because that's kind of our office. And we're down there all the time. We see how things work and we just want to help out.
So can you summarize what was being worked on?
Send them some information.
Yeah, I can send you some information. We have, I mean, it's quite a long list of stuff. just about different changes that have been made or we think should be made. And
Is there one priority that you're wanting specific redress on?
I don't want to talk for everyone, but I think there's quite a few.
I think they all kind of tie in.
Yeah.
Like it'd be better just to show you what we're working on.
So is this you're trying to redraft the licensing agreement? Is that?
Some of it's updating,
Yeah.
like the license agreements to reflect what's currently happening with the day sailors down in the harbor.
Okay.
If
If we were gonna just pick like one way of saying that.
Yeah, unfortunately, there was a lot of talk about this, which I think kind of resulted in new members. But I can hit some of the topics.
Well, if your intention here is to put it on the agenda for future reference, why don't you send us information?
Yeah.
We'll disperse it amongst all the members, and I would suggest everybody on the board study the licensing agreements for both the Windjammers and the day sailors, and we'll be prepared to discuss it at the next meeting.
Great.
Sounds fantastic.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Thank you.
So, Mark,
Yes.
Elliot Thompson, I suggest, Dominic, that you submit that sooner rather than later, so that there's plenty of time to process it through the committee prior to the next meeting.
Give it to you by the end of the week.
And, yes.
Is there any advantage in us reading old minutes? I mean, is some of that just,
I don't think so. No, the advantage is to go
Because it
in
would
with
be
a clear
recorded.
mind and, focus on what will be rather than
well,
what was.
I guess that's what I'm wondering. Are we getting a report of a vision for the future as desired, or?
History of what's going on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess I would like to read in whatever report is submitted, both how you got to where you are and what is your ambition? What are some of the goals moving forward? What are some of the
I'm
proposals?
not sure, but
Minutes are available, obviously.
Oh, I know, but I'm just, I guess,
my
I want to be clear
understanding
what we're
is
actually going
that
to
would be a very complicated process.
But I guess, okay.
But,
Give us what you wanna give
you're
us, I
certainly
guess.
welcome to research it.
But I guess I really want to be clear, what is, I want to see, what is it that we want
Yes,
versus just.
yes.
And when you say
Within
we,
re-
you mean
Yeah, yeah.
us?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
all right, just cool, because I mean, everybody's in the town. It's a new thing, everybody's coming to it.
In the town.
They have no ideas, and that's good.
I mean, Richard Stetson was involved pretty much in all the, talks about these changes, and
Yes.
he can fill in probably as an old member of the committee in some of the stuff that we talked.
Well, let's hope he's at that meeting,
Yeah.
so.
And Mark, just Jeremy Martin, Planning and Development Director, I was kind of involved in some of that at the tail end of what was happening last year. So, I guess I can provide some written comments to you all from my perspective too, after, everyone gets that, and then I can be here for the next meeting as well.
So, just as a survey, how many of the board have studied the licensing agreements and seen them? Okay, I would suggest we do that. Okay.
I have another non-agenda
Yes.
Hi, my name's Rob Iserbeek from Rockport, and I have the Rockport charters, and I do moorings in Rockport and Camden. I noticed this past year the town wanted to go with online mooring, which other towns throughout the state are using. From what I can tell, it's a disaster, and I hope we don't ever go near anything that is third party for moorings, and that we've got to keep our records as efficient as we can for ourselves, which means things are safer. A lot of this online mooring, I've looked at the site, and it seems to basically want to just be an easier record-keeping system for the municipality, but for mooring inspectors, it's a real nightmare. And I think it was probably a problem for the town. I know it was for you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would assume you're probably not going to use it? Okay. Well, any form of that would be, I'm really not an advocate of it. I think it's important to keep it. I mean, there's enough technology that we can use in our own record-keeping that we don't need a whole nother system that costs money. And that's pretty much it for what I have to say.
Good, thank you. Thank you. Any other non-agenda items? Okay, none heard. Let's move on to approval of the minutes.
I just had one question.
Yes.
So at one point, we say that ex officios do not have a vote, and then there is the line, as of right now, the Harbor Committee has 5 voting members. If someone's missing, an alternate or ex officio can vote. But I thought we were clear that, so I guess one of the things I came away with last meeting was, you know what? If we're down to both ex officios and both alternates needing to vote, we only have one appointed member actually in attendance, and I think we should probably reschedule. Like, I think we really actually need to make a protocol that says if we're going to have fewer than 3 able to attend any one meeting, we should probably reschedule. So there should be a majority for,
Well,
you know, or something. Because
Bob?
I really,
First of all, you do have 5 members and 2 alternates.
Right.
You need to have a quorum to
Yep.
have a meeting.
right,
And so if only 2 members are here, 1 alternate could slip in to be a voting person. Ex officios would not normally be in a voting position.
that's right. And that's, I guess I wanted to be clear because it
That's fine.
did actually say
That's correct.
they could vote
That's
if
correct.
that was necessary, and I
You
would,
have 5 and 2, and that's what the ordinance requires, and that's going to be the core. The ex officios are principally because they're the knowledge-based.
They do not vote. Okay.
and so if we're in a position where we needed that vote, we don't have a quorum.
That's correct.
Okay. So where was that? You said they do have voting?
Well, it was just a line that wasn't clear.
Item 2 could vote, if you're down that many people, you're not going to have a meeting.
Right, so just need to make a correction in that line under the last line of.
Break the or ex officio.
Yeah, just delete ex officio.
That's easy.
Got that, Liz?
Yes.
Okay. Any other change? Yes.
Mark, I have one typo. Liz, my name has 2 L's, 2 T's.
Sorry, I do that to you all the time. I'll correct that.
2 L's, 2 T's.
Plenty.
My copy has 2 L's, 2
I know,
T's.
yeah, so does mine.
Oh, mine doesn't.
She did that on purpose, just to piss you off.
Down on number
Oh, number 2.
number 2, it's
That was
just
just
1
dirty.
L
That
and
was
1
just
T.
dirty, Liz.
All right, that's correct.
Yeah.
I appreciate that special attention.
Oh, there we are, right there.
I thought we had
Any-
identified more than 2 items on the work plan. I thought we
We-
talked about the committee, composition of the committee, possibly looking at an ordinance change to increase more members. I thought that was one of the discussions that we're going to have.
Liz, is this not the copy that, the final copy?
Well, it says reviewing ordinance,
That's
As a-
that's part of work, actually part of work plan.
right, which is, there's,
I suppose that's true, that could be just included in.
I mean, I think we wanted to look across the board at ordinances.
No, but,
You haven't finished developing your work plan yet, so I feel like that can be part of the work plan, the final document,
Right.
or presentation.
Liz, I sent you a revised, and
This should be the
I-
revised, this was the latest version that was sent to me for the minutes.
It was. I guess I'd like to hold off on approving the minutes then, because I think there's another copy that I changed. Thank you for pointing that out, because there was a whole list of items that I had put on there before. Okay. Next thing, new business. Yes, under new business, I guess we've already touched on it, but I'd like to, have the board review the licensing agreements for the Windjammers and the day sailors. And also, when you're down in the harbor, just look around and understand how the harbor works. Walk the docks, see what's going on. And, I mean, I spent a lot of time on the harbor, but before I was on the harbor committee, I just never really understood a lot of the inner workings of what's going on down there, and I think that's important for all of us to really study. I mean, there's a couple issues, and I think, the board is just too new to jump in and say, okay, we've got a problem, we want to correct it, we need to study it. And we need to, the way I look at all of these situations is not to do it quickly, but to do it correctly. So, if it takes a little longer to do it right, that's the way we want to do it. Some of the issues that have been brought up to me are, first of all, the dinghy dock. It gets frustrating when you're pulling in there and the dinghy dock is full, and there's several boats there that don't meet the criteria that get dinghy permits. And for example, canoes, they're 16 feet long. It's obvious that they don't fit there. The argument is that, well, they're narrower, they take up less space, but the way the waterfall flows, it pushes all the boats against the dock. So now you've got the canoes and the dinghies pushed up against the dock, taking up 16 feet of space. And, it affects the ability to get in there with a dinghy that meets the criteria. So, that's something that needs to be looked at, thought about, and, how do you resolve it? I mean, there's obviously a need down there for canoes and kayaks. How do you resolve it? Let's try to figure that out. The other thing that I learned was on the floats. The inner harbor floats, people seem to have a thought process that inner harbor floats are valuable real estate that they can never get back once they have it. Apparently, if you give up your float as what's the word called, a volunteer, that
This was started about 4 years ago. I noticed that no one was giving up their float because, let's say you got Mrs. Smith and she's got 2 bad hips and she's 2 years now, she's never actually gone sailing. She doesn't use her boat anymore. So she just puts a dummy boat on that to keep it because she knows if she gives that float up, she's never going to get it back in her lifetime. So we decided, why don't we make it so if you give it up and if you want to be put on what the then Harbor Committee called the Cloud List, I don't know where they got that from, then you're top of the list. If you ever want the float back, the next float that comes available, it's probably not going to be yours when you give up, but you're on the top of the list, and you can say, hey, my two hips got better miraculously, and I do want to start boating again, then you can be offered a float if you want it. No one's ever actually said, yes, I want a float back. So it's worked well because it's promoted people to give up their floats when they're not using it.
I think that's good policy. I mean, that keeps.
Makes sense.
Keeps activity on the inner floats, and.
A lot of movement when we started that. A lot more floats were being given up.
So I just, the reason I'm bringing that up is to point it out so that everybody understands and is knowledgeable about how that works. And,
Sorry, Mark, what about the notion of keeping the finger float, but like we talked about with the mooring, having an agreement? Like let's just say I've got a finger float, which I don't, but I'm going to spend the next 2 summers overseas. So I know I'm not going to use it. Can I say to the harbor master, you can let somebody else use it?
are you talking about a finger float or inner harbor float?
Either.
Either or.
Either or, and moorings. I asked the same question because.
So
all of them
I
have
can
way to
just
go.
briefly talk about that. So we have something called a waiver. And if, let's say you break your leg and you're not going to put your boat in, you're not going to make it. So you go in, you sign a waiver, you talk to Liz, say, I'm not putting my boat in at all. And so it goes to me, I look at it, I sign it, and that means I then look to let someone else use that. And that's been working pretty good. Sometimes I give it for 2 years in a row, but it'd have to be, yeah, I definitely do it too, especially if it's a mooring way out where no one's going to use anyway. It's not that it.
May I ask a question? Hi. Rob Iserby, Rockport. I was noticing that, a lot of the moorings don't get used, but I'm assuming that if a mooring is registered with the town, somebody's paying excise tax on the vessel, and thus, that's what makes the town say it's okay for that person to have a mooring. But if that person doesn't have a boat, they have a 1-year grace period, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then if someone doesn't use their mooring for 3 years, they register the boat.
Yeah.
But they don't put it in the water. The
They
boat
can register
never,
it, they can register it, pay their excise tax, but then not bother to put it in, and not tell me. Usually guys like you will say, hey, no one's used this mooring for 3 years, and then we make a call.
Well, this happens a lot, and I think a lot of the vessels aren't even necessarily registered that I know of because it might just be a boat without an engine. I'm not sure. I mean, you probably know that. Well, I would say that in order to keep the mooring lists flowing, I mean, at this point it seems to me like the list might be quite small. From what I can tell, I haven't looked. But, and I know you do your best to keep people moving, and a lot of people don't commit to the moorings they're offered. But I think we ought to have a deadline for people. So you get an offer, you got 2 weeks to make up your mind, and they can't keep you waiting.
That's what it
for
is right
months.
now. It's a 2-week.
Yeah, there is a deadline.
There is? Well, yeah, I think, if there was a way to really track it, so we can all see, because I know that
For me,
some people.
that's a good point. For me, I wouldn't mind moving it up and making it less than that. Because if I call someone, if I got the whole list in the spring and I've 10 people and I've called them, I put the date of when I first called them.
Right.
And then 2 weeks later, a week later, I was like, oh, I can't call that person yet. Well, they haven't called me back.
Right.
And I'll keep going. But if 2 weeks later, I'll just erase their name and go to the next person of that boat size and ask them.
Because I'd like to see a system that by, sometime in July, if people haven't made up their minds, it's obvious that you just lost your place on the list, as far as waiting.
Well, no, I mean, if they don't accept it, then they can stay where they are on the list.
They can?
Yeah,
I see. So they just keep on.
They just pay the
Putting
money.
you
and
through
they're-
misery
Like
and-
Dave Miramont's been there since 1982. He's topped the list.
Yep, okay.
He never accepts it.
Well, that's my comment on that. Thanks.
Ron, do you have something?
Database. Rob says you're not interested in having another system of keeping track of moorings and locations and ownership and inspections.
Well, I think it's good to have a database. The one you always had was perfect. There's an Excel spreadsheet.
It's not perfect.
What's that?
It's not perfect. There's,
Well,
it's
nothing's
far
perfect.
from perfect.
Well,
There's moorings
nothing's-
in places that are not.
And with an Excel spreadsheet, you can record every bit of data for the mooring holder, from the mooring specs to the lat long to depth of water, whatever you want. You can put it in there. And that's what Rockland used. and it was accessible to everybody. You just go online and look at it. And so the information was out there, and there you go. You had, and it would show updates. So if anything got replaced, a chain or an inspection was done, you'd see that in that spreadsheet. Maybe too much information.
Yeah, no, the town manager and Liz and I are working on a new software to update what we currently use. So we're working on that.
And so what was it you didn't want to see happen, Rob?
I don't want to see us using a third-party, mooring system, which Liz had already tried to get to work, and it failed big time. So we lost a lot of our data with online mooring. And so I just want to make sure we're not going to go back and revisit the online mooring
We're going to get into some
disaster.
detail, and we haven't even gotten a work plan for this committee yet. So I would strongly encourage, take this information down for consideration in a work plan to work on going forward. Because I'm really anxious to get a work plan from this committee and sometime soon present it to the select board. So it's an issue.
That's a good point, though, Rob.
Trying to solve it here is not, in my opinion, productive to develop the work plan. That would be the same thing with Dominic's comments, and et cetera, to get that information to see how it plays into a recommended work plan.
Right. Yeah, whatever the town ends up, they're going to have to do something. You're going to have to do something to record data, and it would be good to have.
That's something we'll take, if that's committee agrees, that's what they want to recommend as part of the work plan, school.
Okay. Last meeting, we requested a copy of the T.Y. Lin report. I wasn't able to find this until yesterday. It turns out it's on our website. So you go to our website, and under Development Office tab on the left, you click on that. You click on
Special project?
special reports, and then you'll find this listed there in the year 2013.
TY?
The T.Y. Lin report.
Was that long?
It's called the
On the
Camden
website, it's
Public Landing Final Report is what it's called.
Actually, I remember seeing this.
Yeah, it's a bit old.
And next thing is not listed on the agenda, but it should have been. Harbor Master's report.
Yes, I thought you guys forgot about me.
I already made a note to bring that up.
The one thing that I do want to talk about is the mooring field. We've got in the venue of 390 moorings, and I've got 5 approved inspectors. These are people that I know have the ability to inspect moorings. They know what the ordinance minimum requirement is. It's the same inspectors that have been here for 20 years. And Rob's one of them. Between them, there's 4 mooring barges with winches that can lift chain up and blocks off the mud to inspect. And there's a slightly different way of how they inspect the gear and the moorings. So I'm not going to talk about inner harbor floats. I'm just going to talk about outer harbor swing around moorings. So in that field, since I took over, there was a very long waiting list for any size boat. And I remember the previous harbor master walking with me saying, well, he goes, I wouldn't put any more moorings out there because people come down and they want to see water and not just boats. And I remember him saying that. And I remember as soon as I took off, everyone's like, you got to move that list. You got to get more boats off that waiting list. So that's the only thing with Jim French that I didn't take his advice. And I started working with the inspectors to move this mooring here, tweak this 5 feet over here, and we started putting in more moorings. And we started making more fields as well between Dillingham Point and Curtis Island. And I managed to make it so the waiting list is significantly less. I haven't heard any complaints that people can't see water. So I think it was the right decision. However, that brings a little more workload to me because with more boats, it's tighter, and you have more of a thing where, for instance, Rob and I just yesterday, we had to go look at 2 moorings because they were a little too close, and someone will call me, and they might even call Rob and say, it seems like, and they might not call him, they might see him at, the View on a Friday night during a cocktail and say, hey, that new boat that whoever got, it's kind of close to mine on a southwest breeze. It's really close. I'm nervous about it. So, that kind of gets to us, or I get something in my log saying, they're real close. And so we go look at it, and inevitably we have to either pull the chain away and it's fine for the season, or we actually do have to make a move where we have to go out there, take the boats off, figure out how to move this one 10 feet, move this one 8 feet, so no one's going to go bang in the night. I would call that harbor management. And it's definitely this time of year, and Rob will contest, it's not a good time to do it because we're so busy. But usually this is when the problem comes because the field isn't full until July 10th. Now everyone's got their boats on for the first time. And this is when we're the busiest, but this is when we have to go out and do it. And it's not that bad.
So what makes them change location?
Well,
from one year to the next.
Usually it's either the fact that nothing was moved and just something changed. Maybe someone got a slightly bigger boat or a different boat and it's tending different. Tim Galvin was going to come here because there's not an issue, but Rob has a mooring barge where he lifts when he inspects, and Rob can kind of tell you more how he does it. He doesn't have spuds on his mooring barge, and so when he lifts up his blocks to inspect, and you do that for 50%?
No, I don't. I only pick up moorings that need to have the bottom chain serviced, and also when, if I do stuff on low tide, I can just pick up the chain, hook up, put the new top chain on. That way, or if I have to just pick the thing up all together, what I do is I take an exact waypoint, I drop a vertical line, and so I won't reset the block until I'm straight back exactly as if I had a spud. So it's one of those things where you might be a foot off putting the thing back.
Yeah,
or 2
yeah.
feet off. But for the most part, what I've noticed is over the years, by being able to do the work with a barge, you make the mooring field a lot better because you can tweak stuff if needed. And as you said, different lengths of boats, different, some mooring inspectors, contractors do things a little differently. They put on really long pennant lines, and that creates a space issue. Of course, the mooring field will always be imperfect because if one chain is dragging one way and the other chain is dragging the other towards each other, those boats may end up banging into each other.
It's definitely dynamic.
So as far as swing circles go, the harbor, as long as people are more or less aware of what's going on with their boats and keeping things headed in the same direction, it's all good. But if everybody was hauling their boats in different directions, it'd be a big mess.
Yeah, so the short and the skinny is that if I get a problem between 2 moorings and I alert one of the inspectors and Rob's the other inspector, they always yell to me and say, well, Rob's got to move because he lifts up those blocks, and the one I inspect, I haven't lifted that block up in 14 years. So if there's a problem, it's got to be on Rob's end. And I hear that a lot from the other inspectors. But throughout the years, if there is an issue, Rob 9 times out of 10 will bring his barge up and will manipulate the moorings and move stuff around so it's better. Like sometimes we've got to move 3 moorings because over the years, just stuff kind of migrates. So let's move this one over here. Like the last move we did was Sally Merrill and Don Mann.
We did one yesterday, and what was interesting about both of these situations is I end up getting a phone call from Steve, or in many cases Tim Galvin, very irate, not Steve irate, but Tim Galvin's quite irate about the fact that this mooring is too close to another mooring. And then Steve and I go out and investigate and look, and it looks like the mooring in question is actually the one that the other person, that being, say, Tim, takes care of, and thus we have to move that mooring. And then that creates a big fiasco because he doesn't think that mooring should be moved. It hasn't been moved in 20 years. And I look at it like, wait a second, Tim, the harbor
That's the funny
is not
thing.
a perfect, it's not a permanent thing. It's changes. Boats change, everything changes. Maybe the mooring even dragged, who knows?
Yes, so this is an issue I wanted to bring up just because it's forefront of my mind. In the last 3 weeks, I've been spending a lot of time, but it's something that I always have to spend time with, and unfortunately, it's the busiest time of year, but that's what we have to do. I don't think any policy has to change. The only thing is that it's an ongoing kind of like wheel that needs to be greased all the time.
It's Ron Hawkins. Seems to me this is a direct result of adding moorings in order to lower the waiting period for the mooring list.
Yep, yeah.
You have a policy where you state that if a mooring inspector sees a space to put a mooring, he should put one in. And then it's a little fuzzy as to what happens. He owns the mooring he just put in, but he created a space which didn't exist before, which in theory shortens the list. But it may in turn create congestion that wouldn't have otherwise existed. And we also have a situation, because of this impetus to continue to try to add moorings to the outer harbor, we don't have an anchorage anymore. Paper charts show there's an anchorage. There isn't one. So big boats, or even small boats, but there's very few small boats that are cruising. It's mostly big boats that are cruising now. Small boats can pick up moorings if they're comfortable with that, if they know that there's a mooring available. If we had a database and the position of the moorings was indeed accurate, I think what you need to do, perhaps, in the beginning of the mooring season or in the fall, put all your mooring barges and all your GPSs together and make sure they all read the same. Because your GPS fix for my mooring is not correct, Rob.
I moved your mooring.
I know you did.
I had to.
No, but even the GPS wasn't even close to where the mooring had been previously.
I'll
This is not a conversation we should have at this meeting.
Okay.
My point is, this is not a conversation between you and I, Rob.
No.
There's a procedure here, correct?
Correct.
I'm addressing the,
Okay, go ahead, sorry.
I don't need your permission to go ahead.
I'm done talking.
Let's keep it
Go ahead, Ron.
let's keep it straight here.
Yeah, it's an ongoing issue for sure.
But it's getting more intense. There is more demand on your job. It actually makes it so that it's undoable. You can't keep track of every mooring that gets moved out there, especially if the mooring inspectors don't report that they moved it. My mooring's been moved out about 200 feet from where it was. There's now another mooring between me and the shore, and there wasn't before. So, it's kind of higgledy-piggledy. And I don't know who put that mooring in. I don't know who ends up benefiting financially from that. But there's a push for each mooring inspector to try to create another space because that creates another job for him. So where does that end up becoming topped off? We haven't got room for any more people to put in any more moorings.
I would say that when things go bang in the night, that's when it gets topped off. And right now, luckily,
Things are going bang in the night now.
I don't have anything in mind.
You've just explained that to us. You've got issues with boats coming up against each other.
Yeah, and that's when we have an issue, that's when we go out and we solve it.
Part of this problem is that you've got dissimilar boats next to each other. Catamarans don't tail the same way as long-keeled vessels.
No, it doesn't. They don't. And that makes it very interesting for us.
So I don't see any quick fix on any of this. So it's something that let's be aware of it and pay attention. Yes.
I would question at what point and who decides what is the capacity of the harbor and what's considered the harbor. And I mean, I like the idea that there's anchorages because that is a little kind of outside the harbor. But, like, is this is
Well,
it part
it's-
of a plan to say, this is capacity, because there is I mean, there's nothing better.
How do you
than when all
figure
the damn boats
capacity?
come out of the harbor, so you can see the water. I love that day when the last boat comes out. I also love that day when the first boat goes in, and
Yeah.
you go, oh, it's gonna start again.
When it's full, yeah.
But there's gotta be a capacity, and we've gotta be able to say what that is to some degree. Climate
So how do
change.
you come up with that number?
And that's what
Is
I
it
would-
based on 20-foot
Well,
boats,
I don't know.
40-foot boats?
I get
or-
that, there's a complication, but I think that would help with management, that we say, like, what was it when you started? Was it 250 and now we're 390? Wow, I mean, and so we can't just in 5 years' time go, okay, now we're up to 570, like, wow. There's got to be a plan for management.
Yeah.
And taking into account sizes and scales and scopes. It needs some study, clearly, and let's put it on the agenda as a project.
I have a quick comment, Ramiro Acevedo Ramos. If one of the concerns is the anchorage on the outer harbor, I would recommend to manage the cruise ships, because the cruise ships, when they anchor on the outer harbor, takes pretty much, I would say, 80% of the anchorage. They come 3 or 4 times a week. So in the summer, that restricts everybody else to anchor in that area, and also restricts the ability for all boats to maneuver in the outer harbor, especially when certain winds. So I don't know if there is a policy about or a management about where they should anchor, but in my opinion, like they did yesterday, for example, try to put the cruise ships between Curtis Island and mainland on the outside. That's a great spot. It doesn't add any more time for the lunches. It's pretty much the same distance for them, and clears the actually anchorage on the outer harbor.
On the work plan.
Okay, it's on the work plan.
Mark, can I ask a question about, not that I want to make more work for the harbor master, but is the harbor master's report always a verbal report, or could it be something that was part of coming out with the minutes, that here's the bullet points of the issues I want to address as part of my report?
Well, it could be, but usually it's, I bring stuff in even from the day before, yeah.
Sure.
It's pretty.
And it would show up on the minutes.
Yeah, the other thing that I'd like to report is that the cruise ships are coming in about the same as last year, and so far, they haven't hit anybody with their launch, so that's good. That's a plus.
So back to your question,
And my
you know,
concern is that I can see how this committee has the capacity to regularly dip into the weeds in a way that might actually not be all that beneficial, because it's topical, it's great, it's like, wow, let's figure out, oh my gosh, that's Bob Jones's boat, and it goes right down, and we're not actually staying very strategic and on kind of point as
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
around the bigger pictures. And it's exciting to hear the specifics of so-and-so's mooring, but I think without kind of more written reporting or something that keeps us above the minutia.
so as I was saying, to your point there, maybe Steve can, like, inform us of his topics on the agenda, so that when we put, Harbor Master report, we can have
3 bullet points.
the bullet points.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Okay. Where do we go next? Abigail, you're up.
Abigail Blakely.
Abigail Blakely she intern for the Conservation Committee.
No.
All right, since the beginning of June, when my internship started, the Camden Conservation Commission shared their desire to do more research regarding the issue of illegal boat discharge and what the situation looks like in Camden Harbor. So a little background on how testing got started in Camden. After the Maine Healthy Beaches program established themselves at Lake Beach in 2013, water quality testing began to take place more often in the area. And then over the years that followed, it became prevalent people became aware that there was a prevalent issue with pollution in our harbor. So in 2010 was when the town actually began to collaborate with local and state agencies to identify and remove pollution sources. The purpose of my report is to highlight a couple things. Since the publication of both Maine Healthy Beaches reports in 2011 and 2012, there's been little additional progress that's been made to address the issue of boat waste and the pollution that it contributes to the harbor's declining water quality. So previous efforts have done really well to identify and address infrastructure-based pollution issues, but none of them have been effective in establishing permanent programs to address illegal boat discharge. So this includes, for instance, in the Maine Healthy Beaches reports, both of them included boater education campaigns that had outreach methods that reached really small audiences and were one-time efforts. They collected data over the summers of 2010 and 2011, I believe, but they did little with it, and none of it was a continued effort throughout the year. And in addition, at this time, my research shows that municipalities in Maine's 5 no discharge areas are doing relatively little to address the issue of boat waste. In anything additional past their federal designation and providing pump out services to boaters. But there are a variety of programs across the country, which I'll touch on and are included in the report, whose sole purpose is to enforce the state and federal law more strictly, specifically Section 312 of the Clean Water Act, which involves the inspection of marine sanitation devices to ensure that they're present and functioning properly. So the report's purpose as a whole is to recommend specific and permanent actions to address boat-sourced waste in Camden Harbor and to hold all pollution sources that contribute to the harbor's declining water quality accountable, because we don't hold water, or we don't hold the pollution that comes from vessels to the same standard as we do on land waste. Camden started their pump-out boat service in 2003. Both pump-out services, the boat and the station that is at Lyman Morse, are funded by the state pump-out grant program, so we request the funds every year. It covers it covered the installation and it covers the maintenance completely. And the Maine DEP is responsible for applying to the Federal Clean Vessel Act grant program every year, and the funds from there last 2 to 3 years. So Camden gets reimbursed for the service and maintenance costs that are associated with the boat and the pump-out service. Other pump-out services in Maine charge up to $10 per service, but we provide the services at the station and the boat for free to boaters. However, having boat pump-out services alone is inadequate if these services aren't being used by a substantial amount of boaters. So the data here shows that from 2013 to 2018, the use of the pump-out boat has gradually declined. Not shown is Table 2 in the report that shows the pump-out boat data from 2008 to 2012. This may not seem substantial, the decrease, but in 2012, I believe, that number, 2008, but the number used to be double of what it is now. I forget if it's in 2012 that it was 8,000 or if it was way back in 2008. I can't remember off the top of my head. And then Lyman Morse, one issue is that data from the pump out boat has not been consistently taken every single year. So there were a few years where we don't have records for the use of the pump out boat. And then the data that is collected at Lyman Morse, I don't have any data from before 2015 because those records have been expunged because Lyman Morse bought Wayfarer that year. But the data parameters that they take over there don't show a useful pattern of the pump out station usage. So they, compared to what the harbor masters, the data that they take, which is an estimation of the total gallons pumped out per service, when the season starts and ends, the average number of gallons per pump out service, and the total number of boats pumped. Lyman Morse only keeps track of the total number of hours they service boats in. They don't calculate the amount of gallons pumped out per service. And their average time per service, they have their dock hands say as takes 15 minutes per service, which is inaccurate because, depending on the size of the boat and the size of the holding tank, the pump out service could take anywhere between 5 and 10 or 15 minutes. And when they gave me their total service hours and the number of boats they've pumped out per season, which they didn't specify when it started or ended, but we can assume that it started and ended the same time that the boat did, the average time per service came out from anywhere between 2.28 minutes to 7. So the data is not taken very consistently over there, and one of the recommendations that I'll touch on in a bit is to encourage the harbor service pump out service personnel to take data consistently with the same parameters and to provide it to the town for statistical analysis. Briefly touching on what's going on in Maine. There are 5 federally discharged NDAs in Maine. They're in Casco Bay, Booth Bay. There's one that encompasses Kennebunkport and Wells and Southern MDI. And there's also one here that is in Camden, Rockport, Rockland, and portions of Owl's Head. Most of them were designated in 2009 as no discharge areas, and to be designated as an NDA, the marinas in the area must first provide adequate pump out services to boaters in that area. And the NDA is described under Section 312 of the Clean Water Act, which prohibits the discharge of treated and untreated sewage within their waters. So for example, this is West Penobscot Bay's no discharge area. And the line is roughly where it ends. So in Zone A, it is illegal to dump any sewage at all. Treated or untreated, it is illegal. In Zone B, it is legal to dump treated sewage, but that sewage has to first be adequately treated by a marine sanitation device, which does not include a holding tank, because holding tanks don't have the ability to treat waste. A marine sanitation device means a macerator pump, and then it's treated by chlorine tablets, for example, or type 2 would be a biological aeration system, meaning the bacteria is given air, it's allowed to grow, and then it eats the waste as its food supply, and then it is treated with chlorine tablets after that. Those are a few examples, but there are a variety of combinations of things nowadays that boats have. The federal law also prohibits the discharge of untreated sewage from all vessels in all U.S. territorial waters, meaning that to discharge untreated sewage legally, a vessel must travel 3 miles offshore to the outer limit of the U.S. territorial sea. So here, it's blurry, but if we're in Camden Harbor and a boat says that they are dumping their untreated sewage, they're going all the way out. That line that is called the 3 mile line, it is 3 miles south of the landmass of Vinyl Haven, and it is highlighted on the NOAA nautical chart. That is how far that any vessel has to go in order to legally dump their untreated sewage. I've heard a lot of people say that they go out that far to dump their untreated sewage, but the likelihood of them going that far, which is much further than 3 nautical miles from Camden's harbor, is highly unlikely. So beyond the presence of pump-out services and the federal no discharge area designation, in our 5 NDAs, there are no, to my knowledge, according to my research, there are no explicit policies regarding the more strict enforcement of illegal boat discharge. But across the U.S., there are a variety of vessel inspection programs that exist, which encompass varying levels of state and federal law enforcement. So the ones I touched on in my report were of Avalon Bay, California, Tarrytown Harbor, New York, Newport Beach, California, and Nantucket Harbor, Mass. So their enforcement methods vary from the mandatory and voluntary use of dye tablets in inspections, the mandatory use of dye tablets during high harbor traffic events, and as well as mandatory inspections for just liveaboards. I noticed that the most strict enforcement programs are the ones that are in geographic locations that have historic pollution problems. So for example, Avalon Bay is notorious for having one of the most strict, if not the strictest, enforcement program. And that is because in the mid-'80s, they were almost shut down by the State Human Health Services due to high coliform bacteria levels. As is in Tarrytown, New York on the Hudson River, they've historically had pollution in the river. General Motors has made a lot of, has polluted the river with a lot of industrial chemicals. Their health of the river has improved since then, but those are 2 of the more strict enforcement programs, and they unanimously voted to pass these programs because they were about to be shut down. But however, all of these places, of all the case studies that I mentioned in my report, use authority under Section 312 of the Clean Water Act to enforce these programs. So Maine, in addition to these states, also share this authority to enact stricter regulations under 312, specifically regarding the inspection of marine sanitation devices and ensuring that they are present and conforming to federal standards. So this brings me to my report's recommendations. The one that I believe is most important is the annual inspection of commercial vessels that the town of Camden has contracts with. I believe it's necessary to stress that it's well documented that the Coast Guard does not adequately enforce Section 312 of the Clean Water Act. I also spoke with a commercial vessel inspector from Belfast, Maine, named Dave Wharf. My conversation with him backed up this research. It's well documented that they don't enforce the Clean Water Act well enough with cruise ships. You can easily look up the amount of pollution cruise ships has contributed to our waters because there are so many aspects and so many hours are taken to look at all the other things on cruise ships and inspections of all commercial vessels that fall under maritime law inspection, that the environmental components of these inspections essentially become an afterthought. And there actually are a variety of different tests that marine sanitation inspectors are supposed to conduct while on board each vessel that is to be inspected, which includes visible solids tests, coliform bacteria tests. So the tests that are supposed to show that the marine sanitation device is present and functioning properly are not being conducted. So how are we supposed to know that they're being used properly, they're being used at all, or that they're functioning properly? And no vessel, unless a vessel inspector inspects and conducts these tests, there's no way for anyone to know whether or not it's functioning properly or it's present at all. So Dave told me that very few vessels in Camden Harbor actually fall under the requirements to be inspected because it's the requirements are based on the size of the vessel, how often they go out, if they function mainly onshore or offshore, and how long they go out and how many passengers they take. And he says out of all of the vessels in Camden Harbor, there are very few that actually get inspected. So when you think about it, there are a lot of boats, a lot of larger ones as well, that are going uninspected, and we don't know what's going on board, and whether or not they are polluting. It's possible that the larger commercial vessels and the ones that aren't being inspected use the pump out station. However, we don't have any way to know that because of the way that the data has been taken at Lyman Morse. In addition, Charlie Foote, one of the dock masters over there, told me that it's very hard for larger vessels to situate themselves up against the dock there to use the pump out service. And I spoke to Jim Leo, who runs the pump out boat in the height of the boating season, and he says that very few commercial vessels in the harbor request the use of his boat during the season. So there's a lot of information that we don't know that we really need to collect. So the first recommendation, sorry to get off track, is to require the windjammers and the day sailors, the boats that the town has contracts with, to undergo annual inspections of their marine sanitation devices to ensure they're present and functioning properly. Because Maine does share the same authority as the states that I mentioned in the case studies in my report to more strictly enforce the Section 312 of the Clean Water Act. It only makes sense to do this because obviously the required level of treatment of sewage from vessels isn't equivalent to shore-based facilities, and that ship sewage is typically more concentrated than sewage on land because there's less water dilution when it's pumped out. So specifically, I recommend that the town manager require the head harbor master, Steve, to conduct an initial inspection survey of all of the windjammer and day sailors in Camden Harbor to gather information about what their configurations look like on board. And then from there, use the results of this survey to make a contractual policy change with the vessels. And after that would come the designation of the appropriate person to conduct these inspections. The next recommendation is to establish an annual boater education program. So I previously mentioned that previous efforts way back in 2011 and 2012 had boater education campaigns, but they were one-time events. They were not consistent, permanent programs, and there's a need to continuously and consistently encourage all harbor users to treat our waters with respect and consideration, especially considering the fact that we are a very polluted harbor. Among other things, the annual boater education program will include the distribution of a no discharge area guide for all boaters that reside in or visit Camden Harbor. I included a copy of it on the table over there if anyone would like to look at it. But essentially this would provide information about what the state and federal law is, what's allowed, what's not, what the different types of marine sanitation devices are, and the idea would be to stock these and supply these with the harbor master at Lyman Morse, the Camden Yacht Club, and here, and give them to all mooring and slip permit holders as well as all transients as well. And regarding the transients, as much as possible, pass them out. Additionally, there are, we would require all slip and permit holders to sign a document pledging the use of their pump out services in West Penobscot Bay before the start of each boating season. So the idea is that these two documents, the pledge and the survey, would be included in the envelopes that each permit person who is reapplying for their permit would get in the mail. They'd have to sign these and send them back to the town, and specify that the completion of these documents is required before obtaining your permit. The point of the survey is to get that basic information from boaters that we don't have, because there are a variety of different head configurations on board these vessels, and we don't know how often they use pump out services, if they use them at all. And in addition to this survey, I'm hoping that requiring all harbor personnel to take consistent data throughout the boating season and then present it to the town will help us better analyze what the pattern of pump out service usage is, so we can make improvements from there. So this is just asking things like, does your boat have a head or a portable toilet? Does your boat have a holding tank? And if you have a system other than a holding tank, please specify what it is. Questions about the use of pump out services, and some basic questions about what are they aware of regarding state and federal law. In addition, another recommendation is to recommend to you guys to, at some point, and I know that there's been talk about reviewing the discharge of refuse, or the ordinance in general, but there are a lot of changes that need to be made there. But a recommendation in the report has been included to, at some point, update the discharge of refuse policy, because as it stands, it's very vague. And if anything, I personally believe that at some point it should be updated to better reflect what we're doing in the town, if not just for the sole reason to let other people know what we're doing, because anything that Camden does as a town moving forward is setting a precedent for the rest of the state and for other places across the country, because there are places that enforce the illicit discharge of boat waste more strictly, but nowhere in Maine. And the town of Camden has been known for setting precedents for a variety of environmental activities, and so this should be one of them as well. And lastly, another recommendation is to the Camden Parks and Rec Department to work to better ensure that the boaters are provided adequate access to restroom facilities, because if we're going to encourage people to use the bathrooms before they go on board, or, refrain from using your head at all if you don't want to, get into retrofitting your boat, getting marine sanitation device or a holding tank, these facilities need to be open when they are specified on the sign, because at this time, according to Jim Leo, it has become his job over the years in the summertime to open these restroom facilities down at the public landing, because the Parks and Rec Department has not come at the time specified on the sign, so they're not open from, say, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. when they should be. And we also discussed the idea of potentially adding a keypad so that after hours, boaters could enter the code and use restroom facilities, which I think is a very good idea. And if we're going to push people to not dump their waste anywhere in the harbor or adequately treat it outside of the harbor, we need to, approach the issue from all sides, and providing adequate access to resources is included in that. Any questions?
Abigail, my thought on this is on the Camden Harbor permit, the site application for moorings, if we had a statement on there, and I think the whole form should be rewritten or cleaned up, and if we had just a short statement on there that all boat owners signed stating that their vessel meets, and if you could look it up, CFR requirements for overboard discharge, if they sign that statement that says their vessel meets those requirements, then it helps promote every year the boaters are thinking of this and looking at it.
Okay.
If
Are you saying like they would look themselves to make sure that they're?
well, I mean, yes, they would, because first of all, they're signing a statement that says that their boat meets those requirements. So the first thing you're going to do is say, well, if I'm going to sign this and say so, then I need to find out what I'm signing and what it means.
I'm not quite sure exactly what you're asking. The point of the survey is to gather that information
Oh, yeah,
from
okay,
them.
the survey
Yeah.
that sounds to me like it's a one-time project to gather information.
It's annual.
The idea, yeah, in the report, it's specified as it being an annual survey, and the contents of the survey will change based on the, what variables we have to complete as a town and what the town's data needs are. So this is all intended to be an annual thing, the pledge and the survey. However, I'm unsure if we should just take every boat operator at their word when they say that they are meeting these standards, because Steve told me that he believes a lot of people who own boats some of them won't even know what a marine sanitation device is. And so there are a lot of informational bits missing.
Information is key, I think.
Yeah.
on this issue.
So before we can, trust that they're saying they abide by it, I believe that we need to find out more information first and then go from there.
Well, I think I'm going to follow Mark and agree with, if someone's signing something, and you sign a whole slew of things in the spring when you get your permit, if you're signing it, I think it's on you to research what you're signing, and I think we do have to take them at their signature and say, okay, you've done the research and you understand what is required and you're complying. I think that's certainly a good first step for the town.
Isn't that what the voter pledge does?
What's that?
Isn't that what the voter pledge does?
The voter, yeah.
I look at that and I don't think it's got the teeth. I mean, it's a pledge.
Then why don't you take a look at the voter pledge and suggest what you'd like to reinforce?
Yeah.
That'd be fine.
We're talking about rewriting it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great idea. We're not worried about how strong the pledge should be or not, because the voters will need to sign it. That's not a problem. So that's what the purpose is, give Abby some feedback on what should be reinforced or not.
The other thing I would just want to note is that a lot of the small boats in Camden don't have a head of any sort. So that, it does say, does your boat have a head? It doesn't say yes or no. So we'll want to, I have a small boat at the head of the harbor, for example, and there is no head.
I mean, perhaps what you could do, Mark, is you could collect comments on these recommendations and funnel them, or somebody funnel them to Abby so she can take them into consideration going forward. Otherwise we're going to get 15 comments.
Yeah,
and 15
it
different
looks like we
ideas.
have
Yeah, let's-
several comments here.
I'm
Yeah, I have
Go
a
ahead.
question. What's the purpose of the signature? Is there an increased fine? Is there?
No.
You
You understand, let me take the view from 30,000 feet, first of all. The view is, we have a polluted harbor. You know what? We don't know why, fundamentally. We've had reports in those 2 years that were mentioned, one's 7 years old, and we don't know anything more today than we did 7 years ago about our harbor. We don't even know if boater waste is a significant part of that or not.
Right.
There are debates about whether it is or not, by the way. But this intent is one thing, boater awareness. That's the principal objective we're trying to accomplish with this idea of putting it into, we're mailing out already. Put anything in you want, that's great. But, just voters, this is an issue, we're trying to solve it, be aware of it. It's the first step in that regard. In parallel with this is not the be-all and end-all what Abby's been working on. It's just one of the ones that we grabbed it and ran forward with it. It's also looking at the harbor, because Abby could speak to, starting the 15th, I think it is, when we're doing the multiple testing of the harbor.
Yeah,
And-
six locations.
All we're getting today is one test once a week from clean beaches at Lake Beach. Whoop, big whoop, that's telling us nothing. It's telling us nothing.
And according to this, it hasn't been positive since 2017.
Well, the main clean beaches has been. They have been testing, and are testing every week at Lake Beach, but it's one data point in a big harbor.
Yeah, I understand.
So
Yeah,
we're trying to do a more pervasive study, so we can get a
that was my takeaway was-
statistical database on what the issues are, because there's likely other things contributing.
When does that happen? The 6th?
15th,
So,
it's starting the 15th.
Every,
You have a statement?
We intend to conduct testing every single day at each of the 6 sites for 2 to 3 weeks straight, because so far, testing once a week at Lake Beach, which is a location that is does not indicate the overall health of our water quality, especially in the Inner Harbor. It's very far removed. Doesn't indicate a status of our water quality, and we need a lot of data to be able to gather a sense of how polluted our harbor actually is.
Are you going to make an effort to test after large rainfalls?
We'll try to, yes.
Good question.
We're doing it every day for 2 to 3 weeks, and I'm sure we'll have a few freak rain, heavy rain events like we have been having then, but yes. I don't believe that according to Dave Bolstridge, I've been doing water quality testing for him. He told me that it doesn't matter too much what time of the day exactly, just as matter as you do it, consistently throughout the week. So we can, I believe it could matter, yeah. I'd have to ask, I intend to do this with Roger Rittmaster, the chair of the Conservation Commission, and Steve offered to lend us one of his boats, so I'm sure that they could help me figure out when the best time is to go out on the boat and test each day.
It needs to be recorded as well, not just the test results, what the tide was, what the weather was.
Yep.
So you're going to record all that?
Yes, yep.
Ron?
Just want to make the observation that the teeth is in the state and federal law. This is just a step to try to make people aware of the law.
Yep.
Another thing I'd like to point out, and I worked in a boat in Vineyard Haven for a period of time, and the observation there was that they had a polluted harbor, and they did testing, and they found that the E. coli and pollution factors went up exponentially after rainfall. So it was dog waste, duck waste, geese
Land-based.
waste that was polluting the harbor, and evidenced by they had, you've got to be really careful about documenting everything, whether the tides flood or ebb, when was the most recent rainfall, how much rain was there, how long has it been since the last rain, because there'll be an accumulation of dog waste and duck waste that's going to make a big effect.
So-
And we are putting treated sewerage directly into the harbor. Why it's illegal to not put treated sewerage in this designated area is beyond me, but because that's what the town is doing. So if the boats can meet at least the minimum guidelines that the waste department needs to meet, then why can't they also?
We don't know if the boats are discharging now or not.
Mark?
No, that's the unknown.
Yeah.
Right.
Mark's up.
I'm Mark Bradman, Teeter, First Board. I've been involved in this for about 4 years. I've been working with the Conservation Commission for 4 years. That's when this discussion originally started. And Abby's part of a program, I'll give you some background information. Abby's part of a program that started for the last 2-3 years. We've used interns to work with the wastewater department to do the inspections on land, which is exactly what you're talking about. And we have inspected virtually every, we're down to about 100 houses left. Every house in Camden is checking their sewer systems, what they're doing to make sure that we're not getting discharged into the wastewater, into the storm systems. We've had some incredibly strong fines that are going to go out for people that haven't done that. So we've been working on that program for 3 years now. The background, 4 years ago, we got the report from the harbor people who are doing the testing. Camden Harbor is usually the second or third most polluted harbor in the state of Maine. And one of the reasons is because it doesn't flush naturally. The geography is such that it doesn't get a clean flush. So things tend to stay in the harbor. So it's one of the reasons it's more important to do this than it may be in some other places. What I'd like to see is find out what Avalon is actually doing. I know you said that it's a much stricter. Let's find out what Avalon is actually doing.
She has that information.
It's in the report.
It's in the report. It's in the report.
Yeah, what's the teeth behind what we're doing? One of the things that's come up in the Conservation Commission the last couple of years is actually having the town do dive tests on boats. So that because what's going to happen is so many of the people in town, when they got their houses inspected, had no idea they had problems. They say, oh no, my house is fine, and they had sewage hooked up to the storm system. They had no idea what was happening. I think that's going to be the same with a lot of boat owners. We need to help them find out what their system is doing.
The last point I want to point out to you all is more discussion with this committee going forward about other issues. It's the intent after comments on this flyer. It's going to go in that this will be brought to the select board for development of just a policy that says this will be inserted into next February, March mailers to voters. I mention that because, and Abby's comment I mentioned about the ordinance thing, as Jeremy can comment on this a little bit, everything doesn't have to be in an ordinance. Ordinances, everybody thinks it's the law of the land. It doesn't have to be. We have a lot of things that are in policies. For example, we have a policy that says we can't spray public property with pesticides. You know, it came out recently because of the brown-tailed moth. There's a whole book of policies. This will be a policy of the town. It's sometimes a more efficient way of getting things into, without having to go to public vote, for example.
Right.
And many of our ordinances have too much stuff that could be in policies, just one.
Well, see, I mean, my point was, and Ron touched on it, is that the teeth are in the state and federal laws.
Yep.
So that's why on the application for the permit,
Yep.
you know, I suggested making the statement that they have to sign and understand the laws, you know, and that's
the intent.
Yeah.
The pledge essentially says that, you know, I pledge to abide by, I can include a provision that says I already am abiding by state and federal law, but it's the first bullet point.
paragraph,
And in these recommendations, I see two sides to it. I see strengthening the teeth of state and federal law via the commercial vessel inspection change of policy with these vessels, because that's how we can realistically strengthen the teeth. We can require these larger vessels that are not required to be inspected by the Coast Guard to be inspected, have inspections done regarding their marine sanitation devices, because they do have a larger ability to pollute the waters. They take a lot of people. There's an exchange of money there. They go out for longer periods of time, hours and days.
Yep.
That's a good place to start. I see strengthening the teeth regarding the state and federal law, which we have the authority to do, with that recommendation. And then everything else, there's still a big component with educating boaters that needs to be consistent throughout the boating season every single year. And we really need to drill it home, because I feel like if a lot of people were more aware of what the state and federal law actually is, where these lines are in the water, as well as how they can retrofit their heads on board, et cetera, both of those things will go hand in hand in reducing the amount of boat waste in our harbor. And I've learned from a few people, Roger Rittmaster has gotten people talking to him and reporting to him anonymously that they have witnessed illicit boat discharge just in the past couple months in the harbor. And Jim Leo expressed to me that there are very few of these commercial vessels that are not getting inspected. Very few of them actually request the use of the pump out boat, and he has been consistent, with the exception of a couple years, of taking that information down, what the boats' names are. And so there's a lot of information with all of these vessels that we need to collect, and we can better enforce the state and federal law with the commercial vessels, and then the education and awareness program should target everyone else who can't get inspected, who we can't enforce, like the smaller boats, the recreational people, and the other commercial vessels.
This document, the schedule is, this will probably go to the select board in August. So you have some time to comment, you know, because we want to get this one off. This is only one step one only. There's many more steps to come that we'll be looking at with regard to the harbor.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to recommend that we push it back. It's great that we ask Lyman Morris to be consistent in their data records for what we're doing, but I think when we've got commercial vehicles, boats that are doing licensing and agreements with us, the town, then we should put it back on them that they record as well when they pumped out, what they pumped out, and so that it's saying, and that's part of them getting the contract.
Step one was private moorings and private boats. Next step is commercial. We haven't hit that one yet. We're going to get to that one.
That's a good point.
But I
But that's a
mean,
good
I think
point, yeah.
and we should be even asking small boats too. I mean, if she just told us that the Coast Guard, who is the federal agent in charge of managing the law, is admitting that they're not actually drilling down, then why do we really think that a little boat owner is going to look into it? So
So
if I
commercial,
can't,
I mean, that's a good point. Commercial boats should have a log
Absolutely.
of their
Yeah.
pump outs, yes. Good. Ron?
Well, if the inspection's being, there's a books full of requirements that these commercial vessels have to adhere to, and one of them is discharge. And so it's up to the officer of marine inspection to look at it and say, yeah, this pipe is connected to the holding tank or to the treatment. You know, that's basically what you're doing, is identifying that it's not bypassing and going directly overboard. Whether or not it's functioning properly, you would have to, that would require a test. But I think it's really important that that you identify the source of this pollution that Camden has before you put a whole lot of emphasis on the increase.
so we can have a duck cull?
Yeah, no, with that, that would
That's what I want to have.
with that in mind, is there any, have we thought of continuing this vigorous testing beyond the 2 to 3 week time period?
One step at a time.
I think this is a start.
I-
You know,
yeah, I-
once we get here, see what the results are, and we may decide we need to test on
Because I
a
would think
regular
the 6
basis. And
locations.
Steve can
I
run
think
that.
that-
He's-
Once a week, and it would be easy to collect, and apparently the waste treatment plant will do the testing for a very reasonable fee or whatever.
Lab.
Should be easy to do.
Dave Olsich has already provided me the supplies to do that with,
You need to make decisions based on data. So we're gonna get some
Right,
data.
exactly.
And then
I'm
we'll
the
decide,
day-to-day.
then we'll decide going forward. The point is, we haven't done
Okay.
anything but one test per one beach by Maine Clean Beaches for a couple of weeks, and that's all we've had, totally inadequate.
And I would say 2 weeks in 6 spots is also inadequate, you know?
Yes.
So I think, you know, this is a great first step that we're creating a report and doing some studies. I definitely think that the actions that the town chooses to take should be educational at this point, because I have certainly not seen that we've identified using data that boaters are the source of the pollution in Camden Harbor.
Absolutely
So
correct.
I think that as a committee, I would like to be, this is the first I heard about how the wastewater survey inspections tied in with this, so I would love to be kept apprised, more apprised of what else the town is doing to determine harbor quality, environmental quality, and sources of pollution. This is one potential source, and I know there are many others.
And it could be minor, it could be major, we don't know.
Exactly. And I would also say, when we say commercial vessels, we should be careful of clarifying what that means. You know, if we're talking about day sailboats that go out for 2 hours, I can tell you that those heads are not getting used a whole lot. If you're talking about a boat that goes out for a week at a time, definitely that's getting used more. And of course, the cruise ships, which is a commercial vessel using our harbor and permitted to do so. We would need to, I think, apply it to that as well. So are we going to be inspecting the cruise
The
ships?
Camden Cup boats with professional crews, are those commercial or not?
Exactly.
Okay.
But one final thing is, I don't think I think the sooner we move to make public toilets accessible to boaters, I mean, that, we shouldn't have to go into committee about that. I mean, I just think we should tell Parks and Rec or whatever, let's get the keypad on, let's not make a public announcement, because the last thing we want is anyone to take advantage of it, but boaters staying in the harbor should be able to use a toilet.
Are we talking about transients here, or people?
I'm talking about being able to not have to use your head. if
I know,
you- if you
but,
want
so is that all mooring holders?
Good.
Whatever. I just don't think we need to belabor that one. Let's make sure it's open as, legally open as from 6 to 10 a.m. to p.m., and then somehow get it so that folks can,
But if you're in Lyman Morse mooring, you have 24 access to bathrooms and showers.
Correct.
Great.
Already.
That's correct.
But if you're not,
at the-
you don't.
And if you're a yacht club mooring, they have showers.
but if you're not, you don't.
No,
No,
No, they don't? No bathrooms?
yacht club, not for the public,
but it's not.
No, but if you're on one of their moorings.
if you're only a yacht club member.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
not.
because I visited, many, many years in the past, when I used to sail up here, and I'd stay on their moorings and use
It's a
their
little more
bathrooms.
restrictive, but the
Okay.
issue is with the landing bathroom, which closes at 7?
Probably like dark or something,
7,
6
I
or
think,
something.
or 8. It's a labor thing, so the harbor master could have a key code to open a key to go, to allow somebody who's staying overnight.
Let's not think about that too
in Camden
long.
To go use that. That's something we'll have to take a look at.
That's on that.
Yeah, that's something, that's one of our recommendations, we'll take a look at that. But that's a labor-related issue, so it's, what it is. Budget.
So that's, but, I mean, you say just do it. I don't
That's not
believe
easy.
that's our purview, is it? That's
No.
Parks and
What
Rec.
I'm saying
but-
is we should
Well-
we should make some kind of a motion that says, don't overthink it. Town of Camden, let's try to really
That's not
make it
an-
happen
That's not-
quickly.
That's not an action.
On the other
You
hand,
can
we should think
recommend
that things that we do, especially that cost money,
Yeah.
are affecting, are solving a problem as opposed to just doing something.
Make a recommendation, that's fine. But the issue of the bathroom is part of it, but I think that, remember, right now, what we're looking at is one step at a time. We want to get this form completed, whatever, however you say, and get it in front of the select board in August to approve it, so get that out of the way, so we stop talking about that piece and go on to the next pieces. That's what, it's going to be a continuing effort. And we only have Abby for, currently at least, till the end of July, end of August, as an intern, so we're trying to get as much into her preview and homework as we can right now, and so we certainly don't want to spend the whole 10 weeks on boat race going like that, so that's not going to work.
No, I think we're on the right path, we're doing good.
Okay, I'd like to thank Abigail for her effort.
Yeah, thank you.
Good job, nice job.
Okay, next item. Where are we? Work plan. What I've got on our work plan is the day sailors, mooring software, cruise ship anchorage, clean harbors and waste disposal, public use of the waterfront, review the ordinance, review rates and late fees, review the waiting list and the late fees for the list.
Is data management within that?
Pardon me?
Data management, is that within the notion of reviewing?
That I have under the mooring software, yeah.
On the, back to my comment about the, absolutely review the ordinance, absolutely essential, we should always do that. But when you're reviewing it, review it with the perspective of what belongs in the ordinance and what doesn't. It can be done by other mechanisms like policies. A silly little example, do you really, and it's a question, I don't have the answer, do you really want to put into an ordinance which must be voted on by the public, how many members of a committee there has to be? This is the only place on the planet in Camden or surrounds that has an ordinance that says what the size of a committee has to be. I mean, do we, if you want it, if we think we should, fine. But just, that's what I mean about policy versus ordinance. And don't fall under the common misperception that ordinance is the only way to affect the law of the town. It's not.
Well, when I say review the ordinance, I'm more, it's more of understand it. Review it and understand it. If there are issues, then yes, we'll bring those up. We're not here to rewrite the ordinance. I mean,
No, you are here to recommend if there are any changes to the ordinance that should occur.
if needed, yes.
Yeah, well, but you're not going to need it unless you kind of think about how things can work otherwise. We don't want to take something out and throw it under the rug, you know. I'm not suggesting that we not establish the committee size or whatever it might be, but look at that ordinance from that perspective. It's rather beefy. Yes. It's rather beefy, and there's everything in there absolutely essential to be in the ordinance that could be done otherwise, including administration of the harbor, including some of the things Steve talked about, which is policy and operations versus town, oversight. When he's managing the moorings and that kind of thing, don't hope that doesn't wind up getting into something in our ordinance that requires, some management, discuss what we can, software, whatever it might be, to control the ordinance density. I totally agree. That's something we need to control better. That can be done through operations, not through having to go through an election that says, change the ordinance. This is happening across the board. That's why I'm preaching it. We have too many ordinances with too much in it that we don't have to have.
I agree.
I would say the cruise ship item about the anchorage should be sort of dealing with cruise ships in general. as opposed to just the anchorage. You know, Steve mentioned that we do have them coming in 3 or 4 times a week now. They haven't hit anybody yet, which is great. But I think sort of just management of the cruise ships is a little bit of a broader topic, but anchorage is part of it, obviously.
Okay. Ron?
If there is something in the ordinance that we would like to recommend be either deleted or changed, that would have to go to the vote of the town, wouldn't it?
Any ordinance change has to go to the vote of the town. But you know what, and I prefer not, by the way, I should mention, before we've had some issues with some fireworks stuff in town, as we all know, in terms of, bottom line is the town cannot prohibit fireworks in our harbor if they get the state fire marshal's approval. That's where the approval comes from. So that contemplates, we have had this weekend a fire on Curtis Island because of sparks from the, was put out, but that's an issue we have to deal with. One of the things we are contemplating is either policy or through an ordinance change is controlling barges. We can control barges that are brought into the harbor. We can have a permit for having a barge brought into the harbor. We can do that. It's an indirect way. We're not trying to, I'm not suggesting we want to control the stop. We just want to say, you know, look, were you aware of the problem that could occur when you put that barge off Dillingham Point and set off a bunch of fireworks? And we, the town, needs to also be aware of what we're going to do fire-wise, fire prevention-wise. Right, right. So those kind of things, I prefer not to do ordinance changes one piece at a time, but if that one we might have to.
That kind of an ordinance change, change navigation essentially in the harbor, that would come to us, I assume, to the harbor committee?
You mean in terms of, it's not about navigation, it's
Well,
just.
You're restricting barges in the harbor.
Not restricting, just making sure that, to be aware of, we had one instance where fireworks display inadvertently occurred that we weren't informed. To make sure we are informed, we just want to control it by saying, if you're going to bring a barge into the harbor, fine, just you have to let us know that that's coming in and where and how long.
And what it's for.
So what
it's for.
What happened to our fireboat?
Hey, what fireboat?
We had a fireboat, didn't we?
Well,
years ago?
That was decades ago. I was going to say, that's before
Zero
my
value
time.
Yeah.
to anybody for anything. It was a jet propelled, and when you activated.
That's long gone.
When you activated the monitors, you no longer had propulsion. It was a complete waste of time and money.
One of the things that could occur, for example, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but, okay, we give a permit to the town businesses to do a fireworks display, to get a permit to bring the barge in, where they do it, fine. Okay, we want you to make sure we have a fireman out there for 3 hours with a backpack, so that one family doesn't have to walk the island and kick out, sparks. And by the way, you're going to pay for it. That's fair. We've got to protect our properties and for these kind of displays. That's an example. We're not trying to stop people from coming in. I mean, we have big barges came in for the American Boathouse. We'd sure like to know those are coming in and for how long. I think Steve did know, but we'd like to make it a little bit more formal. And that would give us some modicum of control. So that's going to be forthcoming probably, because we can do that kind of an ordinance change pretty quickly because we don't have to go through the planning board, Mark. And we can just do it as an ordinance change and maybe get it in November.
Is that going to include for other purposes? So when Brad and Adam bring the same barge that they're shooting the fireworks off of, when they bring that into the inner harbor to load up moorings or whatever, are they going to have to comply with the same process?
Well, we have to consider that because we want to be careful not to over control.
What I'm thinking is just barges are used for a lot more than
Well, they can be, and I think the biggest thing would be the one where it's a knowledge-based thing. It's just stopping by the office and doing something. There would be, if the fire thing, that would be different. That's more of a cost item. Just knowledge, yeah. I think you just don't want.
So does that need to be an ordinance change, or can that be your policy change? Policy is, all barges come into the harbor have to go through.
The only difference is, an ordinance does come to play if you wanted to charge $50 for a permit.
Yeah,
to bring
permits, anytime you go down the road of requiring a
money.
permit, that
If
needs to be in
it's
an
free,
ordinance.
policy. if it's no-cost policy. But I thought about the.
So, I mean, the barges for the mooring holders, you're going to charge them $50 every time they come in?
No, the barges for the,
How do you-
well, the mooring barges I've seen are like the size of this table. I mean, they're not big ones, on my knowledge.
Mooring barge is a mooring barge. They use-
It's what?
Yeah, it is a
The
mooring
the barge that they use for shooting off the fireworks is a mooring barge.
Oh, it is,
Yeah.
okay, well, then we get.
I mean, I think it's also about use, what it's for.
It'll be a part of it, what it's for, and we can handle that, I think. We don't want to collect 50
Why don't you
bucks.
just
Is
get
that
some
something we
vehicles
could
out at Curtis
talk
Island?
to Lyman
Solve the
Morris about, or
problem.
talk to the town as opposed to doing policies and ordinances, and just try to get a,
Well, no, the ordinance thing, remember, that comes down to if it's going to be used for, if we go down the path of use for fireworks, and we're going to charge something because of fire support, it's money involved, that has to be an ordinance change. If it was just simply a policy to come in and give us a letter of notification, that could be a policy only.
but does, I mean, at this point, what is it, 2 fireworks a year?
Three.
3.
But there could be 8, and the town would
Right.
never know, because how it works is Maine Pyrotechnics or whatever goes to the state fire marshal. State fire marshal gives them a permit to launch fireworks in Camden Harbor. The town is never notified of that, and then all of a sudden, the float ends up.
Has that happened
They
yet?
had to tell the town. That's what they tell us.
The state fire marshal's supposed to provide the town with copies of construction permits, sprinkler permits. We
Keyword,
never
supposed
get
to.
those, ever. So we never get any of that stuff.
It's just, it's a little bit of just being careful, because
Why don't
otherwise.
we also do a public relations campaign
Well,
to say, to
think-
let the town know that there's.
We did.
Mr. Chairperson, I just got a report that there's a pretty good-sized oil spill on the other side, Wayfair, and I want to go look at it. I just wanted to comment on this last thing about the bench.
Yes.
Just, thing I just read here, it said, in the letter that she said that, she did this until about, on one of her last trips, and she asked me if I would see about putting a bench in her name in the park overlooking the harbor. So, I don't know if that means the grass park, and maybe,
That's all library.
yeah, that's the library, so I'm not sure why we have this. This is a application for a harbor bench, and yet the woman's sister said she wants to be at the park overlooking the harbor. So maybe the woman is confused in where she should be
It's
putting the
probably
bench.
true. It's probably true.
So maybe you should postpone this and we could call her and just do that.
Good
So,
point.
Is it
Okay.
okay if I go now?
Postpone?
No,
Yes.
you're not allowed.
I want to check out this.
Clean up the harbor.
Yeah, thanks for, doing a good job. Great presentation, Abby. Have a good day, guys.
Yep.
Okay, so.
And I would add, just when we talk about ordinances, the select board last day to schedule a public hearing on any ordinance amendments is August 20th for November. Just,
Yeah.
I'm just throwing that out there.
Well,
If anything wants to get done for August, for November,
Yep.
everything needs to be done prior to that day when we're doing the
That's correct.
scheduling
We
hearing,
have,
August 20th.
we have some language drafted for the barge thing, but.
Ordinance changes is highly restricted.
It is, and it got worse when we have to do, everything has to, the absentee ballots, now everything has to be on the absentee
It's
ballots.
so early.
So,
There's no urgency on anything.
Exactly, I think that might
Next
be
year.
getting ahead of the plan, because we're
Is
not,
there another one in June, or
Yes.
March and
Oh, yes,
June?
June,
So we're not missing a
Yes.
whole year.
correct.
Yeah, we're not going to get any restrictions on any fireworks this year. That's out of it. So we could go to June as a possibility.
Throwing that out there. I think it's important
but
to know.
weren't we talking about all ordinance changes to be done once a year in June?
That's the hope, yes.
mean,
Except
that'd
for, there will always be.
Right.
Special situations.
Well, and I want to be careful. This year, we wound up with or Jeremy got killed with a bunch of ordinances to get into the June ballot, which did 4 or 5. And it was too much of a load. We need to spread the load. So we got to be a little careful about not only this restriction about only November, only June, no.
Yeah, I just can't spend all my time on
No,
ordinance.
oh, no, please.
development, so.
All righty, I think that's a wrap.
Well,
Okay, wait a minute.
Mark, you presented a substantial list of action items for the work plan. that require both individual and collective effort.
Yes.
By the members of the committee. I'm wondering how we're going to address each of those items, what actions are necessary for each of the items on your list.
Maybe, just so, I don't know if all the committee members know how this is working with the select board now, is that every committee is giving a work plan to the select board, then the select board makes a determination if, yep, that's what we want you working on, that is the work plan, move forward. So, I mean, I get what you're saying. I think what needs to happen next would be take the work plan to the select board, and then the select board blesses it, and then we can kind of get into the weeds on how we address all,
So
I think get
how-
into what you're asking
Does the
about.
select board also put, like, say there's 7 things on that list, it seemed long. Would they then also prioritize it? Or do we put it forward with our recommendations on priority?
I think that's probably the best way to do it.
I think they're always smart to provide what you think of the prioritization. Doesn't have to be absolute. We don't want to dictate. The big issue is we certainly don't want to take your valuable time and spend it on a, something and say, well, we really thought the other things are more important, Remember, the committee serves at the behest of the select board. The select board doesn't have the time to pour through every line of the ordinance, for the harbor and make a recommendation. It could, we absolutely could do that. But that's, we're looking to you to make recommendations of what you think changes should be, and what areas should be focused on. And what priorities, you can even make a generalization of priorities, but that's, these meetings should be about principally accomplishing the effort of the work plan. Sometimes in some committees I've seen in the past, not so much anymore, they spend more time statusing stuff, and I'm saying, that's nice, but if you guys want to spend 3 hours, that's fine, it's your decision. But we really want to see progress on work plan stuff so that we can accomplish the mutually agreed things we want to work on.
I mean, unfortunately, what happens is what has been happening is committees have gone down the road without a work plan, and the select board is sitting over here not knowing really what the committees are working on, and the committees are diving way deep into things that, either town staff or the select board aren't even, it's not even on their radar. And
Yeah,
we got
absolutely.
to.
And to it, what happens then is the chair of the committee comes to us and says, oh, we want to change the name of Camden because we studied it for the last 3 months. And I'm saying, what? And then they get this thing about they bring it to the select board and we always reject it. Well, we didn't even know you were working on it. And this doesn't work.
Which is just inefficiency.
So,
Can I just make a comment that might help clarify it just a little bit? The Harbor Committee works at the behest of the Select Board, but the Harbor Committee has our specialists. We have insights into situations and events and conditions that the Select Board might not. And so it's our responsibility to inform them of what we consider to be important that needs to be dealt with.
Well,
And bring it to their
That's
attention.
why it's a
They're
work plan.
dependent
That's
on
why
us.
You're working on a work plan to.
They're dependent
recommend
on
the
us to
select
do
board.
that.
That should be the work plan. That's a mutual effort. When you come to the select board, they'll say, no, we don't want you to work on the ordinance. We think it's fine the way it is. And maybe we could debate that. But absolutely, it's a mutual effort. And by the way, if things come downstream that are big issues, you need to inform the select board that this has become an issue. And we're going to be spending some time here. That's can be done casually or formally, I don't care. We bring chairs of committees to the select board on a regular basis. We just did Energy Committee, Pathways Committee, and hopefully someday soon we'll do Harbor Committee. So yeah, I agree with you. I agree. And that, by the way, that's why you're here, is because you have the expertise in some areas and can, look at, from a view that we don't have. We're not experts. We don't want to be experts on the business of the harbor. There's issues, how much the town should control, how much it shouldn't control. And that's part of the role. I agree with you.
So maybe what I should do is go to the select board
At some point, when
and
you're ready.
just let them know what we're working on and what we're looking at.
Yep.
And, maybe just, this is our proposed work plan.
Yep. Yep.
And just get some feedback
It's a
from
living
them.
document. It doesn't get cast in concrete.
But
It can't. Something could change tomorrow.
Mark, I'd like to suggest that summarize what you've got, circulate it, because to Elliot's point, I think we really are going to need to say on some of them, make some subcommittee assignments to do some research to bring in and further discussion, and maybe we should spend some time next month going, okay, this is it, each, and put some time framing around it. So that we go to the select board looking much more organized and also having some assignments amongst ourselves to do follow-up, because a lot of those topics, I mean, will need some kind of personalized research so that we're reporting to ourselves before we're making any real decisions.
Right.
It would be my recommendation, and I'd be happy to take on an assignment to focus on a topic or something, so.
Okay, you want 1 through 12?
I had one more.
Okay.
And my interest in being here is that we have the challenge of trying to allocate a limited resource amongst a greater population in the town. Not look to see how much money you have in your pocket before we decide whether or not you can use it. So I would like, at some point, to have some conversations about making better use of the facility. There's a lot of empty moorings. Yeah, there's a lot of empty moorings, there's a lot of empty floats. The database, I think, is absolutely critical to understanding which moorings aren't being used for the season, for 2 weeks, for a month, and make those available to people who are on the list, even if they only get to use them for 2 weeks. Some people can bounce around from one mooring to another all summer and have a boat on a mooring. It just won't be the same mooring.
Yep. Well, I think Steve does work with that a little
But it
bit.
doesn't mean it can't be done.
I own a mooring. What's my liability if somebody puts their boat on it and the mooring snaps?
My answer to that is the town should own all of them.
Well, now you,
Not probably
there's,
gonna happen.
there's nothing wrong with putting in your work plan. I highly recommend that first part I heard, which is how do we get the residents and local to be able to use the harbor more than they can right now. But in parallel with that, you've also got to look at the legal issues of a person owning a mooring. What right does the town have to tell them what to do and not what to do with that mooring that they own? To your point, should they own them or not? That's a secondary issue. But you've got to address the legal rights, and you may need to. That's where Sandy Welty could probably help, right, Richard? I think he could help. I think he could help with that advice or pointing us to an advice point, because we have to deal with the legal situation also.
Well, I'd like to think that we're not going to be hamstrung by some conceived threat that may or may not exist.
You have to ask the question.
But then, how much of the liability actually falls to the inspector?
Right.
Well, that's the conversation that's going.
That's why you pay to have it inspected.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
That's why there's inspection criteria. So if they're all up to inspection, then okay, they meet the inspection criteria. If the pennant chafes through because the guy didn't put chafing gear on his chalk, then can't be held to anybody except the captain of the vessel, who is ultimately responsible for his own boat.
That's right.
Figuring all that out is going to be a big pain.
Can be.
Well,
Can be.
But the thing is, Ron, can I just say, I go out kayaking, right, and every day I get, fix a report, 17 available finger floats, 16 available moorings. I'm like, this is bogus.
Yes, it is.
And he reassured me that what I was hearing was not the case, and that actually, he is working through the list in a way that I guess I didn't
He does.
understand.
You
I
know,
mean,
the
I
thing
do
is,
understand that it looks, I said, it's an optic. I know my mother paid for a waiting list for years, and now there's all these finger floats, whoa. So we gotta, that's why I also think part of what we
Use
need
their
to talk
boats, too.
about is, well, not at
Out on your boat, you're
5:30 in the
empty.
morning. I'm out there early, buddy. And I'm just saying,
Right, but
I'm just
somebody's out
saying.
cruising,
But anyway, all I'm saying is, we got to work on the process, but we also got to work on our communications, because I don't think
Yes.
the residents understand the process at all, and all they see is the optics, and they're like, I'm hearing complaints over here, but but I'm seeing all this. What's our role to help?
The process.
But I was
Hicks
down there
does manage
last
it
night.
really well.
And I looked at all the floats out there.
Yeah.
And there were only maybe 3 or 4 sides of a float that were empty.
That's probably true.
Everything else was full.
Yeah.
And, but, you know, and then you look at Stuart Smith's float there, which is constantly empty, but it's commercial. So,
Right.
you know, where's that put it? You know?
And to some degree, remember, this utilization, especially in the mooring side, is already in the harbor ordinance. It's about what you're supposed to do if you're not using your mooring and who to contact and what to do. So there's some of that, there, but,
But that's unmanageable.
well,
That's a database.
It is, and
We put it on the screen where everybody can see it. All you gotta do is, I mean, if Uber can do it, we can come something close, right? No, I understand that, no, I'm just using the
Example,
technology
yeah.
is out there, let's face it.
Won't this all come up in the discussion of the waiting list and?
Yes.
you know,
Yeah,
all part of
yeah, it will. Yeah, well, all I'm cautioning is that there are some legal aspects that other jurisdictions in the United States have run into. When towns, and they're not all that way, that individuals own the mooring, that's their personal property. Beyond safety, swing and all that kind of thing, it's been adjudicated in some that you do not have the right to tell them how to use that mooring.
Well.
And it's good, you know, we're not solving a problem
No,
right
no,
now,
no,
but
no.
we're having discussions, which is good, you know, it's like.
Oh, that's perfect.
It
That's perfect.
opens
We're
things
acknowledging
up.
there's a problem. We're
No,
acknowledging there's a problem.
you're acknowledging,
So, and then we can have a conversation about how do we make better use of the space. I mean, we're not making good use right now. I think we can all agree on that. We're not making good
And
use.
because I also think that we got to look at capacity, and I get that who gets to declare that, but I think
Well,
we're
right
over
now-
capacity.
Right now, like I said earlier, and obviously there's a little tension here, but the harbor master is telling the mooring inspectors, if you see a space, put a mooring in it.
Yeah, the placement of moorings is one thing, but,
I don't think that's a good
but,
way to move forward.
right.
It's that diminishing.
I think we've identified there is a challenge. I'm not sure there's a problem. The problem, again, if somebody tells me, or that we legally can't tell a user what to do with their mooring, then I need to hear that. If it's not the case, I need to hear that.
It's a little fuzzy because the space that the mooring is in does not belong to the mooring holder.
Understood.
He only owns the technology.
Understood. That's right, but the utilization of that tackle is a responsibility.
But by the same token, I thought I had a mooring here. It's
Located,
not there anymore.
oh,
It's been moved 200 feet. Now there's another mooring between me and the
yeah,
shore.
I agree with that issue totally. I agree. I'm
I
talking,
have coordinates for where my mooring is supposed to
understood,
be.
understood.
It's not on
No,
those coordinates anymore,
GIS,
and I wasn't notified.
we're in the same place when it comes to GIS. We're
Personal
talking,
note on it,
we're
but that's
talking,
an example. I just
talking-
use that, I happen to be familiar.
Well, I think your mooring was next to me,
oh,
or close to me.
oh.
And for some reason, my mooring just doesn't feel like it was the same as it was last year.
That happens
Been in the
sometimes.
same
That
place year
happens.
after
And
year.
it happens.
Yeah.
The
but-
coordinates that Rob had for my mooring were a quarter of a mile inland.
Wow.
Wow.
Do you have a habitat mooring?
No,
Mine's a habitat mooring,
Oh, it
so
is?
I don't think mine gets picked up.
No, mine doesn't.
That's nice, you wouldn't even have to row out to it.
that's right, I can
Just keep the,
Mooring in my backyard.
Well,
just differentiate, I totally agree
maybe
that,
those are the coordinates of where your boat is.
There's a lot of,
The G-
smoke and mirrors down here, but to you know, in all fairness, the regulations and the ordinances are so encumbering to the entire situation that it has become unmanageable.
yeah, you're probably right.
It really has. I don't know how you straighten it out. I really don't have. It would take a crew of 2 people all summer to survey the situation,
To map
get
it, map it.
accurate placement of the moorings, and then you'd have to go do it again in the spring after they've been checked and make sure they got put back where they were supposed to be.
It's true.
And maybe you don't have to check them all. Maybe you only have to check the ones that are conflicting with each other. But maybe your neighbor now owns a catamaran and You used to have a full-length keel boat, you used to have a full-length keel boat, they both tail to the tide instead of the
Well,
wind.
yeah,
Now the catamaran's tailing to the wind and not the tide, so
You
they're
know,
bumping into each other.
I think to simplify it, all we need to do is look, maybe we can go back 5 years, and how many moorings are there?
Yep.
Track it. See, so we have an idea of how many moorings have been added each year. And we'll just keep an eye on it, see how many get added next year.
Maybe we could get the mooring owners to take a GPS of their mooring and
But I still don't understand, so
That's unreliable.
if I decide I want to put my own mooring in, I can? I just don't.
report where they wish to.
Exactly, so yeah. I
No,
don't-
the inspectors can put a mooring in. That's the policy right now, as it stands, and I've been told that by an inspector and the harbor
So
master.
if I hire an inspector and say, I find
Find
me
me
a
a mooring,
spot,
yeah.
he or she can drop a mooring,
No,
and then
because
I
there's a
just let the
waiting
town
list.
know?
No.
That's
No, the
right.
waiting
There's a waiting list, but
is
they
for
get-
existing moorings. I just said I wanted to put a new one in,
Right.
right? So there's a subtle distinction that I guess I wasn't aware of.
I don't think
know. We need to talk to Steve about that.
Yeah,
before we
but I
make
think
any-
those are some of the things.
Don't
that
try
we
to
need
solve it
sort
here.
out.
Get this, the inspector bought the mooring, built the mooring,
Yep,
put it in a spot he thought was available,
yep,
notified the harbor master, there's a spot out here.
yep.
And he calls the
And
first
he's-
person on the list.
Well, that would be in theory. In
So
theory.
the next person on the list can say, thanks for the spot, I don't want your gear. I already have gear.
That's the problem that you would run into, except that it kind of looks to me like the mooring inspector already knew he had someone who would buy a
I
mooring
see,
if he put
I
it
see,
in.
I see. All right. Well, it's,
Okay, I think we're
I think you killed it.
thoroughly confused now, and
Well, do we want to have a little working party, or do you just want to circulate what you've got, and we can all say, yeah, that's how,
Can,
so that we come to the next meeting?
can we add making better use of the resource to the list?
It's already there, maybe.
better
It's in the
use.
wait list thing,
Isn't it?
wait list / usage or something.
I mean, why don't you just call it harbor management?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, the ordinance tries to get into harbor management way too much, in my
I think
opinion.
you already have something in there.
I mean, the harbor master needs to have some flexibility and not be bound by a written document so as much as.
And again, remember that you're going to do lots of work and recommend to the select board about policies, maybe, because example, being exaggerating. Well, 390 moorings is way too many, we need 300, whatever it might be. Then how that's executed is the work of the town manager and the staff. They do the execution. We're just setting policy. So keep that in mind. That's why we talk about ordinances and stuff like that, to set policy for the
Okay.
town.
So what I think the plan should be is Liz and I can, you ready for this, Liz? Liz and I can sit down, we'll formalize the work list and send it out to everybody.
For feedback.
Anybody, if you pick something that you want to research and take a hold of, let me know.
Can I just ask, though, what we're going to hear from the day sailors, is that on our, is their issue? I have no sense really of what their big issues are. Are they within that work
They're going to
plan?
send us
I
the
know,
information.
but what my worry is it within our work plan, or is this going to be something?